Hey guys, on this episode of the Ethics Experts, we have Dr. Evisha Ford. She is an author of Benches in the Bathroom, and she runs iCan Dream Center. It is a therapeutic school for young adults and children with disabilities. And she's really a culture expert. So a lot of what she talks about is what we're all fighting for every single day in our organizations. And I hope you find this as interesting of a conversation as I did. See ya.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey bestie, the world's a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button and join us as we change the world by making our workplaces better. I'm here with Dr. Evisha. How's it going, Dr. Evisha?
Hello, doing well. Glad to be here.
So Dr. Evisha is an author. She runs a really cool organization. It's a therapeutic school for young adults and children with disabilities called the iCan Dream Center. She is an author of a book called Benches in the Boardroom. And she's somebody who is a real, you're just a really cool thought leader on kind of the human experience, on, building cultures that actually get the best out of people. And after meeting you in June, I just said, man, we have to get her on the Ethics Experts to connect a little bit deeper. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So why don't we start by talking a little bit about your therapeutic school? I think that was I think that's a pretty inspiring thing that you've started, and then I'd like to hear a little bit about how you got into this game.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I am a social worker by training, and I cut my teeth in the field working with homeless youth on the South Side. And one thing that I figured out pretty quickly is that students come to school and that there's an opportunity to really serve their needs in a variety of ways once they're at school. I went on to become I got recruited by Chicago Public Schools and became a school leader. So I'm a former director of special education and assistant superintendent. And I really saw that there was still a gap in services for young people with disabilities. And so I founded the iCan Dream Center. This year, Nick, we actually celebrated 10 years, which is amazing. That I just can't believe that it's been 10 years already. So.
Imagine when you were first kind of recognizing that this gap existed. Fast forward to now, 10 years, a decade after starting this thing. What a journey that must have been.
It was quite a journey, and it's crazy because I'm only 21. So I started super young.
Yeah, as a child, a mere child.
Yes,
yeah.
I was just barely a child. And so, really working in high schools, in the high school system, I saw that there were a lot of young people that were falling out, that were dropping out of school and dropping into the criminal justice system. And so that was really the impetus for me. We are unique in that every student we serve has some sort of special need, be it anxiety or a learning disability or just some other things going on. And so all of our attention and efforts is focused on this type of student, whereas in a public school system, they really have a big pot of money and resources, and they have to also meet the needs of students with disabilities within that. And so I was able to really pull out this group of students and support these students who aren't really functioning in public schools and partner with the public schools to make sure that they get what they need and they can be productive citizens in society.
Was that the kind of shape of the gap you saw when you were working in the schools?
Somewhat. So I built several programs when I was working in the public school system as a leader to meet the needs of students. And I saw this really gaping gap for young people who were definitely not going to graduate high school. And so they'd end up being fifth year seniors or do what most of them do, which is drop out. And so I approached my superintendent and I said, hey, here's an idea for yet another program. And he felt like for various reasons that it wasn't the time and that it would give the appearance of disproportionately serving one group of students within the school district. And so
why is that a problem? Why is that a problem?
I think specifically I was told the optics of it didn't quite feel right. And so it was also a negotiation year. There was a lot happening in district that year. So the bottom line is it wasn't the time for them, but it was definitely the time for me. So I left the school district that year, and that was the year that iCan Dream Center was born.
And so tell me about that process. You saw this need, you tried to do something about it in the role you were in. You hit some roadblocks and you said, well, I'm not going to let that stop me. Talk to me about what that process was like of going out on your own? Like, what did that feel like to kind of take that plunge? Because you were already kind of plugged into a job, you were already plugged into a system, and then you kind of jumped out of that plane. Maybe it felt like jumping out without a parachute or something.
It did. I was 1000% on track.
And you were what, 13 at this point?
Job. Exactly, 13 years old. No, I was definitely on track to be a superintendent. I was being really recruited heavily across the U.S. for a superintendent's role, and I just knew that that wasn't where I was going to make the impact that I wanted to make. I'll say that. I moved pretty quickly. So what I did understand was how to build programs for young people with disabilities. I had led a department of, I think at that time, 60 people, and our budget was probably about 25 million. So there was definitely a part that I was used to leading, but not my own, right? Like the final buck didn't necessarily stop with me. So that was scary. So what I did actually is I started taking business classes at night, and I soaked up all the knowledge that I could. And I got to be BFFs with my now still a finance director, and just learned what I could, because knowing how to do a certain thing is different than knowing how to run a business, right? And so that is really where I started to understand the importance of shaping the culture that you want to have from the very beginning. So that was a lot of night classes, and I still sign up for workshops whenever I can. I mean, I met you at the SHRM conference, so this is something that's important to me.
Yeah. Tell me about those night classes and the light bulb moment, as you're kind of learning this new skill set, this business skill set. You said something that I think is really important. You said knowing how to build programs is very different than running a business. And you also said that in order to run a good business and get something that's sort of scalable and that can put your vision to work in the world, you have to start with the right culture. How did that light bulb turn on for you? And because a lot of people running businesses still haven't had that light bulb turned on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say the most freeing experience I had, I was at University of Illinois, Chicago, taking a business class, and one of the visiting professors said something to me that really set me free, because of course I was experiencing an imposter syndrome. Should I be trying to open this school? Should I just about face and go back to my very comfortable role and place in public education? And he said something to me that really has set me free. He said, nobody knows how to run a business unless they've been to business school. They know how to fix cars. They know how to do hair. They know how to do all these things. They may know how to fix computers, but unless they've been to business school, they don't know how to run a business. So pretty much you're at level playing ground with most entrepreneurs.
And what did that, you said that set you free. Talk to me about how that set you free and how that changed your mindset and maybe helped open a window to air out some of that imposter syndrome that we all feel victim to,
It made me okay with the mistakes that I made, with the bumps in the road. It made me okay with only getting a bookkeeper 2 years into the business, right? Like, it made me feel okay with not realizing that if you have one employee, you do need workers' comp insurance, like all these things that I was literally learning from the ground up. There are so many things that you don't think about when you think about firing your boss and launching, that it does make you feel like you're just maybe not in the right space. And it was overwhelming. I mean, we didn't break even, I don't think, until maybe a year and a half in, which meant that I was also teaching in higher ed, and I was also doing a lot of workshops and doing a lot of other stuff in addition to the work. And so it got to be overwhelming at the time. I remember someone asked me, hey, have you made a profit yet? I'm like, absolutely not. So she said, well, when are we going to quit? I was like, well, that's an interesting question. I said, well, I haven't felt that it was time to quit just yet. So, and here we are 10 years. I still haven't felt that it's time to quit yet. So.
That's good for you. I like that. I like that saying. I mean, it's kind of like you can't be a mountain climber unless you climb a mountain, even if you've read 1,000 books and looked at 1,000 pictures of mountains. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to actually go ahead and do it. And when you're standing at the foothills of that mountain and, you're looking up and you see all these people climbing it, you're like, oh, wow, all these people know what they're doing. They must know what they're doing because they're on the mountain. And a huge portion of those people, maybe all of them, are encountering things they haven't seen before, but they have, for some reason and at some level, they've just said, this is a mountain I want to climb. This is a trip that I want to take, and I'm going to kind of figure it out.
And if I can add to that,
please.
some of them have bumps and bruises underneath their clothes you can't see.
You can't even
All
see
you
them.
see is them continuing to
That's
make
right.
progress, but you don't see that underneath they're black and blue,
Yeah, and
right?
you don't
From all
see
the
how
bumps and
nervous
scrapes.
they are from the wind, trying to rip them off the face of the mountain and all that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, there's really 1,000 kind of connections to this picture that you described. And, it's so crazy. It's like that imposter syndrome creeps into everybody's mind. I mean, that never goes away. And it really causes a lot of people to not even start that journey.
Right.
But there was something in you, though, before you heard that from that person where you said, I need to do something here. I want to try it. You knew that there was a skill set that you had to build. What was the root of that? Was it a sort of sense of personal accomplishment you wanted to achieve? Was it, this is a burning fire of a problem. There's this huge population of students and kids who aren't getting what they need, and it's causing this sort of ripple effect through our communities. Like, what caused you, what was the sort of source of that passion and that fire that caused you to not want to give up and to do those higher ed and do those workshops and all those other things before you turned a profit a year and a half into it?
Yeah. I'll say that when I understand vocation is something that I can't not do. And so, in its simplest form, it's that. What I can share is that I was in a service and we had a visiting speaker from New York, I believe. And he was talking about this program that he started for street kids in New York. And one of the things that he said that sort of caught my attention was that if you see the need, that's the call. And at that moment,
Even
I
just
had
recognizing it is your call.
that's
Yeah.
your call to be involved. And I heard that talk at church on the heels of my superintendent telling me it's not the time for this program. And so to me, that was clear to me that it wasn't the time for them, but it was still the time for me.
Isn't that
So,
funny? Like, you can look back and you can see how these, disparate moments kind of feed together to,
yes,
be that catalyst to make you take that plunge. That's really cool. I mean, imagine if, that speaker's plane got delayed and they weren't at that service that morning, or you got stuck in
right,
traffic or something, right? Like,
right,
maybe that thing didn't happen and, that wouldn't have been, enough to kind of make you take that plunge.
right. And so full circle moment, the gentleman who used to be the senior pastor, he's on our board of directors. He knows that story and he ran into this gentleman last week and shared that with him. So I thought, wow, 11 years later, he's now understanding the impact of him having shared something that he started and how it's had this ripple effect all these years later. So,
Which just goes back to the importance of, sharing those kinds of things with other people. Like, if he hadn't shared that thought, he shared that thought and that had an effect on you, and who knows how many other people in that audience that, that turned the light bulb on for them. I want to kind of
right.
dive into, okay, so you started this thing, you had this light bulb moment about the importance of culture. Talk to me about how important that was for you to have that lesson as early as you did in starting iCan Dream Center.
So when I was the assistant superintendent, I was exclusively required. I was exclusively charged with doing the hiring for my department, which was actually several departments. And I remember thinking about how critical it was that we got the right people in place to serve the students that we were serving at the time, who were extremely um, marginalized in various ways, mostly culturally and linguistically. Um, and so I sort of carried that with me when it was time to hire for the iCan Dream Center. I wanted to make sure that the people that came understood that the work was not only didn't just require hard skills, but also soft skills. And so I started adopting this saying when I would hire people to tell them why I selected them, which is that I can teach you how to teach. I can teach you how to intervene. I can't teach you how to care. So that's really the start of my sort of hiring practices that came from public ed. But I also quickly realized is that the unique designation of our school is that it's called a non-public in Illinois, which means that we have the same requirements of a public school system without the benefit of being able to offer a pension. And so automatically, we are competing with public schools all around for the best and brightest candidates. And so what I endeavor to do is just to make the iCan Dream Center such an appealing place to be that there was no question, because what I do understand is that people will sacrifice money and even sometimes benefits for a positive work environment. And I've done it myself. And so from that very point, from that moment, I endeavored to make sure that the iCan Dream Center would have a rock star culture. And I started borrowing from places like Google and other places. And I started reading about why people thought places were fun to work. And I started thinking about the folks that had stayed on with me, or even I can think about folks I'd hired in leadership that have been willing to come with me to new organizations and why they wanted to come with me. And I started asking these questions, and that's how I started building the culture at iCan Dream Center.
So what are some of those lessons you learned? I guess it's a little bit unique at some level because you're in education, as you said, you're competing against public school where there are meaningful compensation differences. Like a pension is a substantial asset, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And you recognize that there are kind of means of compensation, for lack of a better term, that are outside of dollars. So what were some of those things that you started to see elsewhere, and how were you able to actually implement them in iCan Dream Center 10 years ago?
Well, I'll say the implementation was easy, right? Because there's no bureaucracy. I don't have to have a meeting. I've negotiated several public school contracts, right? I didn't have to go to the union and ask permission to do this thing. Like, it was just me. So in the implementation from the ground up was easy, right? Mm-hmm. At the time we started, when I started thinking about these things, we probably had 8 employees. So it was pretty simple. I started from the foundation of us connecting to each other like a family. And what I'll say about that is that I was very sensitive to that family being one that made allowances for differences, but wasn't exploitive. Because a lot of times you'll see an organization where they say we're a family and it's a means to exploit people or to get them to do things that maybe they should be compensated for. And so I was really careful about making the people feel valued, but also accepted. And so there's this sense of belonging and being able to bring your whole self to work, and knowing that your ideas will be heard and that you have a voice at the table. And so regardless of how large we grow as an organization, I definitely want to keep that small feel of you have a place and I want to hear your ideas. We've been able to innovate in so many amazing ways because we've given voice not only to our teachers and our team, but also our parents. We have our finger very much on the pulse of what the parents are expressing as pain points, and we're able to build on that. But that's because organizationally and culturally, we value what parents have to say, what students have to say. We invite their opinions and their input.
Well, that starts with you. That starts with the culture that you've tried to build. And you said something interesting just now, that you wanted people to have a sense of belonging, and you wanted them to know that their voice matters, and you wanted them to feel like they could bring their whole selves to work. What does that mean to you in your organization, and what does that not mean?
So it doesn't mean that every idea that you lift up, we're going to implement immediately. That's not what it means. It does mean that each person has a unique perspective from their role that is valuable to us overall, right? And we want to hear it. It does mean that we're listening if there's an opportunity for us to revise systems. We have a strong no gossip policy, a very strong no gossip policy, just based on experiences that I've seen and lived in other organizations. And I'm pretty serious about that. But what I do say as people are onboarding is this is our feeling, is that if there's something that involves you or something that you want to see, there's always an open door to share solutions on how we can get better. Anything that is not growing is dying, and we are committed to not being stagnant. In fact, one of our organizational goals is relevance, which means we're always growing. So if there's a growth opportunity, just as much as your responsibility is not to gossip, your responsibility also is to lift that up for us so that we can make the shifts that we need to. So
that no gossip policy is interesting. I think that sounds great, like as a headline, but like, what does that actually look like where the rubber meets the road? What challenges have you had in making sure that that's a real thing? And how do you help, like, how do you, I want to implement a new no gossip policy in my company. How do I do that?
I think you have to have a commitment to it yourself, first of all.
All
You,
right, well,
as a
forget it
leader
then.
of it, have to be committed to
Yeah,
it.
forget it then.
The
Just kidding.
folks you hire, you said forget it. The leaders in the organization have to also be committed. Like the folks on the leadership team have to also feel that and be committed to it. So
But then,
luckily
like,
enough for me,
when it pops up, what do you do? Like, do you do
address
something?
it.
Does everybody do?
Address it.
Does everybody
Yeah.
feel empowered to do that? How many times did you have to say something before everyone realized that this is not just a platitude? This is something that is real. Dr. Evisha means it. And I feel now empowered as somebody who's on a lower level to, correct gossiping behavior, for example, where in another organization, while I know that that's wrong, I haven't done that. Like, what actualized that to make it real?
So it would be outrageous to say that no gossip ever happens. Of course it does, right? What I will say is that I can give examples of where 2 or 3 examples where we've responded to it swiftly and released people to their next season who couldn't get on board with it. But I think the more effective means of making that part of the culture is reminding people of why they enjoy being here, because it's drama-free. And saying every time you engage in a conversation that's not productive, you undermine the very environment that you like to be in. And so how can you be a part of maintaining this warm and fuzzy that people recognize when they come visit and they feel, but it's up to us to maintain that. We have to be the gatekeepers of that. And so it's really pushing it back on other folks. So I'm sure there's gossip that still happens, but I also think it comes from folks being empowered to use the language. What do you want to come from this conversation? Do you need to have a conversation with the other person that you're referencing? Or what does this have to do with you? How does it impact you? So there's 3 little questions we have. How does this impact you? Where do you want to happen for this conversation? And do we need to involve the other person in this conversation?
And it's also pretty powerful, though, that initial kind of frame you shared, which was, let's remember that we love working here because of the way this place operates. And let's not undermine that by, behaving in ways that are kind of contrary to that ethos. When you look back take a snapshot of like today's culture, look back to the vision you had, when that light bulb moment turned on where you're like, I really have to get this culture right. Talk to me a little bit about how that vision maybe has changed, and maybe at what points along the way did you feel like, oh man, this thing is like moving and I have to do something about it. And the reason I ask that, as you're thinking about your answer, is, to me, I feel like culture is kind of like a weather pattern, and it's always changing depending on who's in the organization and what those people are going through and how closely, leadership is keeping their eye on that culture ball. And it's never like, in my experience, it's never like flipping a light switch and saying, cool, this is our culture, everybody do this. It's like changing all the time. And, you go through these different seasons, or like I said, these different kind of weather patterns. Have you noticed that same dynamic? And have you seen, like, as you hit a certain growth point or a certain number of people in the organization, that you had to kind of readjust or reassess or, redouble your efforts or redouble your commitment to culture or something like that?
Yeah, you sort of answered the question.
All right,
No,
we'll move on
that's
then.
exactly right. As we continue to grow, we notice shifts, right? And so we did have to double down the year before last. So about 2 years ago around this time, because it was this inflection point where we went from about 30 people to 50 people in the building. And so that's huge, and it was fast, and we exploded in the number of students that we were serving and families. And so we hired pretty quickly. So what we learned is that we still need to keep the same slow and deliberate pace about hiring. What we learned is that the orientation onboarding needed to be very specific to them learning about the iCan Dream way. And so we sort of slowed that process down in terms of having them to come and observe and take in the culture and see if they can be a part of it and what they thought. And so that was important to continue to do. The other piece is some things that just change, I think, as the systems get larger. So when it was just me and one other team lead, I could sort of see directly what was happening and affirm it or support shifts. And so as it got bigger, we had to do more formal things like Employee of the Month, right? We had to see what needed to be addressed and sort of focus our efforts around certain organizational values, right? So this month we're looking at connection. Are we relating to each other like a family? Who's done that? Like, so we had to have core value drives. And so there's been times that as we've had these inflection points, we've had to sort of get everybody back in the right space. Sometimes we said, you know what, we all just need to go out together and have a time out to sort of connect to each other, human to human, outside of kids. We're closing the building early and we're going to go to the neighboring spot and have a good time, right? So there's been different responses for different things. What I will say that's gotten a big bang for its buck in this season, when I have my biweekly check-ins with my leadership team, which are individual, separate from our meetings, I'll ask them for headlines. So I ask them to tell me who on your team is doing well. Give me the headlines for the folks on your team and what's happening. So then I can help be a thought partner with them about what's happening, what dynamic is occurring that we can sort of strategize together with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I like that, that concept of being a thought partner. And I was going to kind of ask you, and maybe this is the way you do it, at some point, you're not touching everybody in the organization. They're not interacting with you on the same level of intimacy that they were when it was a much smaller organization. And correct. I want to hear a little bit about, strategies you've developed to turn your direct reports into those culture carriers for the organization. We're doing this big, there's some recent information that's come out from a couple of different sources, about how important it is for those middle managers. Like, the culture is really defined mostly at some point by those middle managers, because that's where the majority of the employee, leadership interactions are. And absolutely. That obviously, as you get more of those middle managers, that opens up at least the possibility for a wider array of experiences, the standard deviation of interaction increases. And so what strategies have you developed to actualize those people and get yourself comfortable that the leaders you have in place are being guardians and pushing the culture vision that you had initially and sort of currently forward, so that everybody has that experience,
Yeah, I think is what I shared in terms of these regular check-ins. It's also being present. We do a new hire luncheon with folks who are in the organization after a bit and sort of get their feedback, right? We get some information in exit interviews, but a lot of what we really get in terms of what it feels like is in those new hire luncheons, right? So I am deliberate to be a part of all of those. So I don't get a chance to know people like I used to, although whenever I'm in the building, I do a lap in the building. I look each person face to face and say good morning, and I'll try to note something to sort of remember or recall that I can hang on to in the next meeting. That works right now. I don't know if it'll work if we're at 100 people. I don't know, but right now it works. So,
well, you're staying intentional with it, right, through the growth, and you're trying to figure it out as you go, which makes a lot of sense,
Yeah. And if I'm honest, that's really the toughest part for me.
Totally.
Is not having as many personal connections to the team. Like, I met someone, I was at the office on my honeymoon actually for a week last week. When I came back, there were 2 new team members and I deducted who they were. And so I went and introduced them. But I thought, wow, if I had run into them on the street, I would have had no clue who those people were. And yet they're on my team. And so that was hard for me. And I know folks in large organizations, it's hard for the course for them. But for me, I struggle with that.
Well, I'm sure you do. Yeah. I mean, it started with, it was just you and a couple of folks, and now you have 50 or 60 people and you're continuing to grow. And that's such an odd thing to happen, right? You're like, there's somebody in my house and I haven't met this person yet,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not somebody with my kids. I have this maternal feeling about the folks in the organization. So it's like, who's this new person coming in? Oh, they're one of us now too. So,
right.
Yeah.
You're somebody that, I think we connected pretty quickly on, you seem like somebody that both is like culture forward. You want people to feel that belonging, but also you seem to have a good balance with performance. So I think a lot of folks struggle with, like, how do I create this psychological safety, but how do I also make sure that, we're moving the ball forward and, we're a high performance organization, or we're an organization that prioritizes excellence. Where have you, in building your organization and building out your culture, is that something that you've struggled with? And if it is something that you struggle with, what strategies have you, kind of developed to kind of maintain that balance? Because that's a hard one to get right. You know what I mean?
I think This is interesting because I facilitated a workshop yesterday talking about organizational culture. And what I said, because I was speaking to a group of educational leaders, is that it's probably more difficult for folks in other industries than it is for us, maybe.
Interesting.
Because for me, our bottom line isn't a higher profit margin. It's not more widgets. It's people, right? Like we have the quality of life of these individuals in our hands. So there's no question about if we can perform. Like it's not even negotiable. Like
You have to.
the people, we have to, right? Like society depends on us turning out a good product. So while I want the teachers and the staff to feel safe and like they belong, it's for the benefit of the students that we serve, right? It's not for me. It's not for it's for the benefit of the students we serve. And so I've held a really hard line about that. That,
Okay.
I had a tough conversation today about, you know, someone saying that they were busy and me retorting, no, your role as a leader is to get obstacles out the way so that the teachers can be present for the students. So that's the only busy that matters in this scenario that we're talking about.
Then isn't it really just a question of like clarity of purpose? Like it
Mhm.
sounds like you guys have a really clear purpose and it's very
optimizing student
tangible.
potential.
Yeah, that's
That's
it.
it.
And that can be your sort of guiding light. And you
Yep.
can then judge all these actions and little decisions and behaviors and trade-offs against that standard. And
right.
so maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just kind of catching up to you, but maybe if an organization is to like produce the best widget, if an organization's mission is to produce the best widget, how is that, like the clarity of that purpose, that's a very clear statement. How is the clarity of that purpose different than what you're talking about? Is it the romanticism of it? Is it the sort of cohesive or like more consistently, the more consistent like viewpoint among the work staff that like, I am here to help other people? You know what I'm saying? Because like the statements' clarity are arguably equally the same, but there's something extra, it seems like, on your side of the fence that you can point to more readily. Is it a common language? Is it a heart issue? Like, what do you think it is?
I think it's 1000% a heart issue. And I think it is a heart issue because the consequences of not doing it are steeper, right? Like we know what happens to our students if we can't get them to optimize their potential. We know what happens, right? Like we know how the story ends. Statistically, there's a robust body of research that says we have this last shot with our students. And for many of them, it truly is a last shot. We have to get it right. Right. So in our high school program, we have a 100% graduation rate.
Wow.
And
that's huge.
It's after our students come to us after having been tossed out of public school, and oftentimes schools like ours, not like us, schools, the same designation as us a couple times before. So sometimes we're their fourth or fifth stop.
Wow.
But
that's wild. I mean, that's a really special thing. I mean, that's like unheard of, right?
I don't know of any others. I can't say that. I don't know. I just know we do.
Okay. Well, that's a very diplomatic answer. I'll say that sounds absolutely wild. That takes a lot to be able to have that kind of a success rate. What of that success rate would you attribute to the culture? Would you say it's all that? It's mostly that? Because
mostly that.
To your point,
mostly that.
I mean, they've been spit out of the system multiple times at this point.
Yeah.
So, maybe it goes back to what you were saying, because right off the bat, you're telling folks, I can't teach you to care. That caring is so foundational to kind of all those interactions. It really kind of turns into a guiding light.
It is. And I said too, and I was deliberate yesterday when I was talking to these educational leaders, is that, part of the reason that we have as part of an interview process for someone to come and observe before we both make a decision, right? They're deciding on us, we're deciding on them, is that I want to see if our students are not going to act. They're going to be who they are. So I want them to see that when our students are dysregulated, that we're handling them with support, not punishment. And so if they can't get on board with that, if they're appalled by the students not being ordered out the classroom or suspended, for dropping an F-bomb, right? Like, then maybe it's not the place. And so
right.
I was deliberate about talking about this sort of culture of punishment that our students are subject to with that group of leaders, to say that that starts with you. So I needed to say that.
And what do you look for in that interview process to kind of suss out whether somebody is on board with your approach or just kind of paying it lip service?
Well, in Benches in the Bathroom, I have a whole section on hiring for zeal. No, but seriously, I ask them questions about why they're here, like what their goal is, like why they get into education. I'm listening for the hard piece of things. I'm asking them questions about how they've accepted feedback and when's the last time that they had to have someone correct their behavior, right? So I'm getting a sense of how malleable you are and how committed you are to growth, because someone that is interested in growing and being a different person next year than they are today welcomes that feedback, and someone shedding light on their blind spots, right? So there's a lot of questions. And, you know, I have a little bit of an advantage in being a clinician, right? Like being a therapist. So I'm trained to listen to what's not necessarily being said.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't do the interviewing, by the way, but my director of people equity and culture is also a clinician. So we're listening very intently to what the micro expressions and the shifts in the body and how I'm having to recall a story.
I see.
Yeah.
So that probably helps to get sort of that extra set of clinicians' eyes to help kind of see through it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I was just kind of
And I trust her gut too. And by the way, we give the set of questions before they come. We let them see the questions, because I don't want you to have to, I want to know who you are. I don't want you to have to try to decode or figure out what the questions are. Answer the questions, but.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably better. It's probably a better interview. There's probably less, you know, excess variables in the data that you're receiving in that interview when someone's able to prepare. Because how many times, I mean, if you're interviewing somebody that's just not good on their feet, they might give you a really crap answer, where if they had time to think, like what?
You might miss out on a great person because they're just
Yeah.
anxious.
Or maybe they're just bad at interviewing, or to your point, they're just anxious. You know, it's a little bit interesting though, because, you know, the clarity of purpose, getting back to that within your organization, it's not that different than just like a regular public school, because the implications of getting something wrong are the same in both areas. So why is that clear? Let's say that's the same purpose in both organizations, you know, a massive public school system and your organization. Why does that not turn into a guiding light for every interaction in that other realm? Is it lack of leadership? Like, what do you think it is?
I think it's the middle leadership. I think if you talk to folks who are in the cabinet, like, you know, I had control over hiring as the assistant superintendent for, you know, the few departments under it's the middle management piece you talked about. It's about the message not necessarily diffusing through the organization. And I think when you get to large organizations, it can suffer even more.
Yeah.
I'll say this too, like having worked in Chicago public schools, what I realized too is that the schools are really the individual schools in Chicago public schools are very self-sustaining. It's different than a suburban school district where they have less local control. And I would say that the experience in one school where the principal is doing a great job is saying, hey, here's what we stand for. This is what the space will feel like, and they've had time to sort of to build that out. It feels totally different than in places where that's not there. And so I think it has to do with like this piece of middle management. Who's pushing out the message, and how deliberate of an effort has there been to make sure that the culture is replicated. I think culture is an afterthought for a lot of organizations. It just sort of happens.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, when you found it to be the thing, I found it to be the thing in organizations I've worked with, in my own organization. It's, to me, the most important thing, and it's an afterthought elsewhere. Well, I mean, what do you attribute that to? I mean, that's like, it's not a minor point. You know what I'm saying? It's like the main driver of your value creation is getting this culture thing right. And it's probably true for most organizations, but there's, to your point, hundreds of organizations, thousands and thousands of leaders that they think it's stupid, or it doesn't work, or it's not important, or it's an afterthought, as you said.
I think it's sort of built into our Judeo-Christian society as an organization, or as a country, right? Like you just work hard because you're supposed to, and you get paid to do an honest day's work, and if you work hard, you'll
It's like a
rise to the
dutiful
top.
culture or something.
Absolutely. So I think that is still very present in the generation of folks who are probably about to exit leadership and move into retirement. Like, I think that that's still there. So I think there's some of that. I also think that folks who get into leadership, I mean, in education, you do have to have certain training and credentials and retraining. But I think when folks are moving to leadership, they don't always have training as leaders, right? Like, they're just good at what they do. They're really great teachers. So, hey, you're going to be the curriculum director. You're going to be the curriculum director here. You're going to be the lead, a coach, but you haven't necessarily had training on how do you lead people, or in any organization. I think people are selected because there's something about them, but that something about them doesn't necessarily translate into them being a great leader. And so I think that happens a lot of times. But I also think when people are starting businesses, I can speak from a small business perspective, they are not often thinking about culture. They're thinking about getting into the black.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's like, what do we need to do? Not realizing the role that culture does play in that too. So I was just real clear that who I was competing against, and my only advantage was to make the space really great to be at, right?
Well, how lucky though? How lucky that was the the rules of engagement for you. Like, the fact that the thing that you were meant to compete on, or that the only thing that you were able to compete on, ended up being the secret sauce for your organization. That's a very lucky position to be in. But I guess I would maybe say that that's, if culture is the thing, then that's true for every organization, because the excess engagement you get from your team is beyond that which, the average public school is able to get, I would imagine. And then also, you've done a good job, obviously, of, preventing people from falling into that apathy that many bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people end up falling into once they get into the system and they get kind of chewed up and spit out by it.
Yeah. And you know what? Actually, I'll say, really, my book, Benches in the Bathroom, came out of the amount of calls and inquiries that I was getting from educators who are burnt out. I got so many calls. And what I realized is that, nope, it's definitely not a anomaly. This is happening, and what we know is happening nationwide, the Great Resignation. But it made me start thinking a little bit about this secret sauce in a different way, and also why I was being called on, and why the Illinois State Board of Ed asked me to write this workshop for school leaders, right, to talk about this business of cultural excellence. So perfect segue.
I do want to talk about the book, Benches in the Bathroom. Talk to me about where that title comes from. Give us the rundown of the book, and I think it's really an interesting angle.
Thank you. So it's really about building cultures of wellness, right? It's about building a culture where people can be their best for students. It came out of a workshop that I was hired to create for the state, and I was doing all these hours and hours of research, and I said to my co-facilitator, this should be a book. Do you want to do it? And she's like, absolutely not. And so I couldn't not do it. Got picked up by Solution Tree, which is a great publisher in education. I want to say they're the top publisher in education. And I thought, wow, this must really be something after all. But really, the book is about strategies for leaders on how to care for the folks that they serve. It's grounded in servant leadership and transformational leadership as philosophies, but there are very concrete strategies and resources on how to show up and optimize the potential of the folks that you serve as a leader. From interview questions to agenda outlines to ways to look at certain traditions and rituals in your school and how to bolster them so that they can really, you can get the bang for your buck out of them. So super practical, very applicable, easy read, and lots of stories that I share about my experiences. That was the hardest part, Nick.
I bet.
I had the work, but the publisher kept saying, nope, more. And I'm like, what do they want from me? They wanted more of my personal story. So in the end, it made the book quite a bit more humane.
Yeah, and more
And a
relatable.
better read.
Totally. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not so
yeah.
sort of, it's not a textbook by any means. You can see how these concepts are sort of put into practice.
Yeah.
In
But
going,
why didn't I think of that?
yeah,
Why
well,
didn't
that's
I
why there
think
are
to include
publishers.
personal
Yeah,
stories?
exactly. Well, I think at the end of the day, people buy you, and the people who join your organization at some level are joining because of you, because you've built this thing or you've put this ethos into practice and you've made it a reality. And I think those personal stories, they ground it, to your point, in something that's, you know, more humanized and makes it a little bit more relatable. In that process, what were some of your, you know, biggest surprises, or what were some of your like favorite takeaways from the book?
Oh gosh. The book, right? What were my favorite takeaways from the book writing process
Either
or
one of
the
those.
actual book?
Well, I'd like to hear
Oh,
both, but I'm leaving it a little bit open for you to take it where you want.
okay. So the book writing process demanded a lot more from me than I expected. And what I would say to anybody who is going the traditional publication route, when you think you're done, you're probably just halfway there. So I'll say that. I
Wow.
was like, oh, I'm like, oh, it's pretty much written. They were like, yeah, that's cute.
Nice
And
outline you got there. Yeah, exactly.
exactly. It's a completely different book than what I approached them with. Um, so the process is that it was demanding, and that what my takeaway is that you really have to have people who support you and love you in that process, because I feel like I dropped out of my kid's life for about a year. Some very early mornings and late nights. Not really dropped out, but it felt different for sure. So
Well, now your kids have another sibling, you know?
exactly, they do. Well, the iCan Dream Center is their older sibling, and now this book is their younger one. So they were quite proud of it. My fourth grader asked if he could take it to school and share it with his class. I'm
Cute.
like, sure, but I don't think your classmates probably
Maybe he's trying to
wanna
share it
read
with
this
his
book.
teacher, you know?
Yeah, exactly. His principal, actually.
Yeah, right.
So, so that was a takeaway, and it surprised me, right? Because I wrote a dissertation, and it felt different. They weren't demanding personal stories. I could just focus on my data.
Hmm, hmm.
But my favorite takeaway from the book, I think, is really a story that I share about losing a student. So, um, one of my students I lost to gun violence, and actually had to step over his body to enter the school building.
Wow.
And it was tough. Him and his twin, to say they are my favorites is an understatement. And so, the way that my then boss handled me in that situation was pretty awful. But it was such an important aha moment for me, because it made me realize that leadership matters, right? Like, it does matter. Your influence that you have on leaders, as a leader, on people that you're serving, like, it's of critical importance. And even though I wasn't in a leadership role, I actually didn't think I would be. I loved my job, and I thought I would do that forever. Um, but that experience stayed with me in such a deep way that I feel like the folks that I've had the privilege of working with have benefited over the years. And so I share that story in depth in Benches in the Bathroom.
What do you wish that leader would have done, or how would you deal with somebody who is in your position, stepping over the bodies, coming into the school of their favorite students?
Big picture, I'm glad she handled it like she did, because it's made me a better person, right? Like,
Yeah, sure, totally.
It had an impact on me that wouldn't have been had if she handled it perfectly. Maybe. What do I wish she would have done? I wish she would have acknowledged my humanity in that. I wish that she would have put her own ego aside and saw the big picture. I will say eventually she did. The interaction didn't go well. So my response also wasn't my proudest moment. But I left her office, and she did have a come to Jesus moment and apologized on Monday. I mean, at that point, the damage had been done. But she did, to her credit, she did kind of have some
Epiphanies or whatever. Yeah.
So.
But again, all those interactions are critical, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people remember, they're going to remember that. You know, you remembered it. It shaped who you are as a leader. It shaped the ethos for the type of organization that you wanted to build.
Yes.
But it's rooted down in this sort of like below the sort of cognitive mind surface, right? It's rooted down into this sort of subconscious feeling and you know, the impact that made on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. Dr. Evisha, where can people find your book? It is really great. It's really, obviously, if you're an educator or you're in leadership, it's a great book. But what I find that's great about the book is that it's kind of applicable across the board, because at the end of the day, we're talking about people and we're talking about culture. And that's something that we all deal with every single day, whether it's a good culture or a bad culture. We're surrounded by people. And, you know, I think anyone is a leader who's willing to be an example and willing to step up and drive change in the world. So where can people find the book? Where can they find you? Where can they learn more about iCan Dream Center?
They can. I should be holding a copy of the book, but I'll just hold this. It's called Benches in the Bathroom. It is available on Amazon and on Solution Tree. You can connect with me at drevisha.com. I'm also available on LinkedIn, Instagram. I also have a Facebook page that I would love for folks to come on and jump into the conversation. It's called the Compassion Investors. And while I moderate, it's really a page for the people. And so to talk about all of these things, to continue this conversation about psychological safety and trauma compassionate leadership and equity design.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Evisha.
Thank you.
Until next time, take care.